All right, welcome to the Pet Life Podcast. I am Patrick, as always, and today with me I have a very special guest, Mr. Topher Gardner, Christopher Gardner, Chris Gardner. We just went over this, so I'm just gonna throw them all out there for you. How you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent. Hopefully you can hear me over the rain. We're getting hit pretty hard.
Yeah, I can hear you, man. I know you had some troubles yesterday, so I do appreciate this time, especially with all of the storms that you guys are getting. Let's dive in. For those who know my channel, I follow Owen. I follow a lot of the same people. We kind of run in the same groups. I've just been listening a lot to what you've been saying in your different conversations with, obviously Owen, Jacob, and just all these other platforms, and I really enjoy how we're hearing about your experiences and your growth from your NFL career, your football career, and how that's kind of transpired into your architecture world. Someone who played football as well, not professionally, there's a lot that you learn when you're under those types of stresses, physical, mental, emotional. And I just kind of want to ask you to start off. Did you feel like what you learned at such a young age, and obviously through your career, kind of helped propel you into that architecture world? I know one thing you said specifically is when you started architecture, a friend of yours was like, "I'd love for you to build this," and you said something along the lines of, "If you send me to school, I can do it." So, do you
Yeah, I told him, I said, if you send me to school, I'll build it for you.
right? So, and for me, I guess the question is, um, your career before that, or just kind of obviously your personality, but did you feel like those types of sports and that type of commitment and dedication is kind of what helped also get you into the world you're in now? And did you learn a lot from that experience? If that makes sense.
Yes, there was one thing one of my coaches in college said, and we were loafing as a team. We weren't really, hitting it with everything that we had during a conditioning day. And so he just kept adding, these gassers, adding and adding. Everybody was throwing up, and everybody, like, I felt like my heart was jumping out of my chest, like I was like wanting to quit. And on one of the gassers, I'm running and I hear him say in the background, he goes, "It's not that you can't do it, it's that you think you can't do it." And I was in all this pain and suffering, but the real pain and suffering was in my mind,
Mhm.
because the physical is just physical. And so from that point on, I never had a problem with conditioning ever again, because he was right. It was just a thought. I was suffering more from the thought of not being able to do what was being asked for me than what was actually being asked of
Mhm.
me. And so I don't, and by the way, a lot of my teammates didn't suffer the same fate. A lot of them chose to wallow in the suffering. And so
Mhm.
they didn't get playing time. They didn't see the field, right?
Right.
So I would say, because I wasn't the best athlete, I kind of had to lean on willpower, and I had to know where I was strong, and I had to know where I was weak. And I also had to be opportunistic. So I think all of those things kind of led to my building career, in the sense that I have karma with building, because my dad's a builder, my sister went to school for architecture. I grew up with a drafting board in my bedroom.
Mhm.
I could always draw. So I think I had some building karma in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also have always been one of those people where, like, I saw the opportunity and I just asked for it. The guy said, "I really like that." I'm like, "Send me to the school and I'll build it for you." And he did it.
Wow, man.
So
Well,
yeah.
and that's just the thing is, as you were talking, in just as I said in previous conversations that you've had, it's really something about as you also mentioned yoga and other things, which I would love to get into, is just when you're challenging the body, as you said, your mind will be the first thing that tells you whether or not you can or cannot do it. I've worked as a personal trainer for over 10 years now, and this is something that I've seen and experienced with clients, myself included, time and time again. Is the limitations that the mind has basically hindering what the body's potential is, and vice versa. But it really is mostly a lot of us in today's society being so heady that we don't really ever tap into our physical potential. And, I feel with sports, specifically, well, football being one of them, is when you're wearing the pad, you're literally wearing extra weight. And you said being out in the heat, I remember the 3 days. I remember all those just grueling exercises where you're just like, my heart's going to pound on my chest, like you said, or like my feet feel so heavy, but you keep going, you keep going. And there's something that I feel a lot of people who've done sports going into another field, whether it be architecture or something where you have to tap into that mind. I feel there's a lot more ease for people. Not that it's easy, but you can make that connection so much easier because, I know what physical pain enduring it is in taking myself past where I thought I could ever go. And as you said, well, send me to school and I can do it. And you
Yeah.
kind of you really get into that headspace. And I think there's a lot to be said there. As you said, with the physical body, did you have to kind of change over to the architecture? Did you have any of those moments while you were at school where it was like, I don't know if I can mentally, psychologically do this, and you kind of allowed yourself to get over those obstacles, or was it easy?
No, not mentally, but I went to school to learn earth bag construction. So super dope. It's called flexible form rammed earth construction. And I went to Cal Earth University. And I did have doubts when I started to build my first structure because it was pretty ambitious. And I remember we all went out to sushi because I was doing the practicum, and my lead instructor was like, okay, yeah, so you say you're going to build something, show us what you're going to build. And I had all the plans already drawn, and I put it on and they're like, you're going to do 3 domes together in like Mickey Mouse ears and put a second story on it. And you're going to do all this. Like, this is your first build? I was like, yes. and they're like, and then I was looking at them like they were crazy. I was like, what's the deal here? And they're like, Topher, you have to understand the majority of people that come never build anything. And I go, well, why would you even come then?
Right.
Because in my mind's eye, if I'm going to invest the time and effort, I'm going to do it.
Right.
But apparently a lot of people just like the window sit. And so, yeah, where I had the real doubt was day 30 of pounding bags. Because I was doing manual compaction.
Yeah.
And I had lost like 25 pounds of weight. And one of my best friends, she flew back into town and she saw me and she's like, "Oh, you look great." And I was like, I shouldn't build these domes anymore. I should open Topher's Earth Bag Fat Camp.
It's just, yeah. Everyone's like, what do we do? You're like,
We're just pounding bags.
Pound bags.
Pounding bags. Yeah. And so it was, yeah, I had doubts then, but from the design perspective, it comes like, I know my limitations. Like, I don't ever commit. I should say I don't commit to things I haven't tried because I do experiment a lot, but I haven't put myself in a situation where I feel like my intellect was lacking in what I was doing.
Right. Well, the reason why I ask all these things is because in going down this path is because my show or my podcast, the P.A.T is an acronym for Present Awareness Training. It's something that I think is super important about being in the moment and knowing self, because that's where the human potential kind of shines through, or those intuitions really stand out for people. And that's what you embody. A lot of people in the community that we run in and stuff, that's what they're trying to embody, or we're always striving for. And as you said, it's like, all right, well, I know I'm going through challenges, but I know I can do it. Or like in your conversation, it's like, why would anyone come here if they're not actually going to do it? And I'm the same mindset. It's like, well, why wouldn't I move to where I was going to move and do what I was said I was going to do? Because that's why I did. But that's what the society we live in today, right? A lot of people just want to window shop, or putting themselves in the space where they can be like, oh yeah, I'm an architect. It's like, oh yeah, how's that going? It's it's good. I'm really, I need it to be perfect. I need this first one to be perfect, and it's 10 years later. Um, you know,
Yeah.
I do script writing, film. I've worked in film for a long time, so that's the thing where I can relate. Where you get, hey, how's this new script, or how's that script you've been doing? I'm not like quite where I want it to be. This is like 6 years. This is 6 years after the idea came to life, and it's like, well, can I read it? They're like, no, no, I'm still working on the first page. You're like, 6 years for one page. All right, cool, man. Like, so that's just something for me of just knowing, okay, well, the people out there, they're actually doing the things that they say they're going to do. How did they get there? Like, we could say they were born with it, but it's like there's other things that come in their lives. So are there any things that you can kind of recall back other than sports where it was like that kind of pushed you in that direction of like, I'm going to go do the things I said I'm going to do?
Well, I had really good parenting and mentorship. So from my very first soccer coach was Italian, like off the boat Italian, and he spoke like next to no English.
Where,
And
where were you living?
South Florida.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was like this little, 5 and 6 year old bobblehead doll, and I wasn't all that athletic, but I was really strong.
Right.
And I had all these health problems, and so my coach had been pre-framed about all my health problems. So he threw me in the goal, like as the goalie,
Yeah. Yeah.
and very soon I was punting the ball to the other goalie every time I got the ball. So that kind of ruined the games, and so they put me out in the field, and he's told me to shoot. He's like, every time you get the ball, shoot, like
Yeah.
shoot. And I remember distinctly he was getting some flack. This is like 1982, 1983. The helicopter parent really wasn't there yet, but
Right.
you know, and I remember him standing up for me. I remember him on the side being like, they were like, why does Chris always get to shoot? Why does he shoot? And he goes, because I told him to. We're not going to score unless he shoots. And then he called me over and he goes, you shoot, you score.
Yeah.
And it was like in my mind, it was like, you'll never score unless you shoot.
Yeah.
So I had that like from an external outside the family source.
Right.
And then I was always like building erector sets, and I was always building with Legos.
Hmm.
And my dad as an architect builder, he was like, well, let's make a scrapbook, and let's take pictures of of everything that you make.
Right.
And so my parents would like take photographs, and they would chronicle it, and they would ask me questions. So it was very supportive, like when it came to like my creative side. And
Right.
my mother was a very by the book person, and she would always get frustrated that I would never build anything that was suggested, even though I would build like some really neat stuff.
Right.
And but my parents, from an artistic perspective, were always like, oh, that's, yeah, do this. Like whenever I was endeavoring into anything that needed mechanical or artistic attention, my parents just supported me wholly with that. Like I never felt judged.
Right. Dude, I'm right there with you, man. And to kind of piggyback, that was something as a kid as well. Is my parents were always like, look, if you're gonna do something, we'll support you, but like you have to see it through. Like you can't just quit halfway through the season. You can't just, if you're gonna, even if it's a project, just do the project. Like give it your all. And if you don't like it, then you don't have to do it again. Or, you know what I mean? Or whatever the case was. And it was always that kind of support. And I mean, for me, it was like, I would come to them with like the most random things. I'm like, I want to do this now. They're like, all right, just complete it, man. Like, give it your all if you're gonna commit to it. And then they're also like, if we're also gonna give you the money to do this, or if we're gonna invest in this, like, go do it. And so for me, it was always like, as you said, family support, having, even though my parents were separated, but it was like having a good, strong stepfather as well, being like, look, we'll put the time in for you. And it
Yeah.
was just looking at that and the same thing of going, I know that whatever I put my mind to or decide I want to explore, I have the support. And it's also the challenge too. I don't know if your parents, as you said, your parents would be like, oh, let's try this. But it's like, you know, challenge you and being like, do you think you could do more without it being the helicopter of like, sit down, do that, make sure you do it this way. It was giving me that ability, as you said, the creativity to be curious about like, oh yeah, what if I can try to do more? Like I remember this distinctly as a kid playing baseball. My stepdad played college baseball and everything, and he would do, he broke a broomstick, tied it up, and we would hit bottle caps against my old garage, and it was a piece of shit garage, so this thing was like wrecked. So we would
Uh-huh.
just hit bottle caps for hours, and so he'd be like, "Well, what would happen if I just get it?" We would break, like we'd bend it in half so it was even smaller. And I was like, now it's like a challenge for me. And we would, instead of him being like, hey, we should do another 20 minutes, we'd be out there for another 45 minutes just because the curiosity kicked in of like, what can I hit it? And then you're missing, and you're like, dang it, dang it. And you're like, no, keep going. He's like, all right, we need to go. And I'm like, we don't eat dinner until I'm done. Like, so it was, so very much in the same mindset of having that support. Now, as you got older, obviously, playing sports, did you find yourself finding more support other than just your family, like outside support, community, or anything like that? Or is it kind
Yeah.
of still close knit?
I lived in a boyhood paradise because my neighborhood was directly my house was equidistant to a bike shop, like the biggest bike shop in Fort Lauderdale,
Hmm.
and the biggest hobby shop in Fort Lauderdale. So at age 9, I was riding my bike either to the hobby shop or I was riding my bike to the bike shop. And I asked so many questions to the salespeople at those places.
That's
Like
hilarious.
I just pounded them, and I'd be like, "Well, if I buy the JRX2 Turbo and I get it in graphite, is that better than the RC10 in aluminum?" I just like pounded these guys, like, and they would just shake their heads when they'd see me coming in. And I think what had happened to me with my family was a big believer in treating me as an adult.
Hmm. Yep.
So they were always putting me in a situation, if I wanted something, they would empower me as an adult, not as a child,
Yeah.
of how to go about getting it.
Right.
So, like when I got into remote control cars, it's an expensive hobby. And I got really good at it. So I was racing, and racing is expensive no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad just being like, I remember asking my dad for all this stuff for Christmas. And he's like, I'm not going to get that for you. But I think you should start, a job so that you can make the money so that you can buy what you want.
Yep.
He goes, I'll help you with your first business. I was 11 years old,
Yep.
and it was like, start mowing lawns for the neighbors, cut Mrs. Jones' hedge, like. And so I started a landscaping company at 11 years old to fund my addiction to remote control cars. And so that built a sense of work ethic that
Yep.
I've never lost.
Yep.
Like, if there was something I wanted, I knew I could work to get it.
Yep.
And that was a very important thing for me, because it wasn't just in the sports arena. It was like in the realm of commerce.
Hmm.
It was like, there's always work to be done.
Yep.
I can fill a niche, and I was successful at it. I just did it.
Right.
And so that built a lot of confidence.
Well, what's interesting is you see this undertone of children who have the support, obviously structured, nuclear to whatever extent, but having that support from equal parents, having a job at a young age, because that was the same thing with myself. And obviously a lot of friends that, our friends and people that we know, same thing, they're telling the same stories, right? And this is part
Right.
of that potential is you're taught at a young age to be a child or a kid, but also what comes with it as you get older is like you said, hey, you want things, right? So what are you going to do for them? Like, what are you willing to take on? Like my stepbrother at the time when we were younger, same, I think 10, 11, we wanted to go do stuff. And my dad was like, all right, well, because he was a fireman, but he also worked carpentry. So he was working on these buildings and they needed their sidewalks shoveled because I lived in Chicago. So I was like 10, 11 years old. Like we were making good money just shoveling. Everywhere he'd go, we would just then shovel. So during the winter time. So it was like a really good work ethic. And then we got to a point where we'd be inside and he'd help us like, we'd be scraping, paint chips off and doing things like that. And you're like, while all your friends are playing, you're like working. And it was
Yeah.
cool because as you said, it was fun. Like there was an enjoyment because you knew that there was like the thing that I wanted, basically was waiting on the other end of this, but it was also, there was that sense of maybe you can agree. There was a dependency. Like now this place, even though they really didn't need us, they were like, no, they need me there or their business is going to close, like wherever your
Yeah.
mind starts to go, or like, oh, their hedge is going to get so bad. And, then,
I, al- I, I also had a partner in crime. So my best friend my entire life. Like we met in fourth grade, but we didn't really become friends until fifth grade.
yeah,
And then by sixth grade, we were co-conspirators. We were always racing our remote control cars or one-upping each other with our bikes and stuff like that. And we were always fishing. Like all of our hobbies cost money, and
right,
our parents weren't gonna pay for anything,
right.
and our parents didn't drive us anywhere. So by age 14, we were both like going to be Olympic bicycle people because we literally would ride our bikes everywhere. We would race our parents from the Everglades to the ocean, to
Wow.
the from the east side of Broward County to the west side, or west side to east side, and sometimes we beat them.
Yeah.
And in 2000, no, it was 1991, Hurricane Andrew decimated South Florida. And he and I were like the most like disaster capitalist 15-year-olds you ever saw. He like spent like $300 or $400 and bought a chainsaw. We're 14 and 15-year-old
Wow.
boys riding around the neighborhood with chainsaws, going up to houses, going, "You would need us to cut down your Melaleuca trees." We cleaned up. It
Wow.
was just like we were just opportunistic, and
Right.
our parents kind of let us do it, and we always had a partner in crime.
Right.
I
Right.
think
Right.
that's very important. At least for in my life, I always had a partner in crime. We were always like, yeah, let's just do it.
Right.
So that's a lot of fun.
Well, that's awesome. And obviously, it's good to kind of go back and think of all these great moments. But at the end of the day, as you said, like, as no matter how old you are, you always remember those because, as you said, those become so pivotal in the kind of like the culmination of who you are, who you've become. And it really is, as much as the things later in life, like starting architecture or whatever endeavors you've taken on, massage therapist, it's like that's where it stems from. And that's such a powerful piece of this whole thing, right? And as you said, being co conspirators, but also asking your own questions, because I do want to talk a lot about architecture as well and pick your brain about that and, biochar and all this stuff. But it's just learning how to really understand individual people on these podcasts of like any good story, like who is this person, kind of who made them, what made them the person they are. And obviously there's so many things we can go over. But it is fun to hear the stories of like, what made you so driven, dedicated. And I know there's more there, but is there any other moments and things you want to share before we move on or anything?
No, let's go to your next thing.
Awesome, man. So I do want to talk about this specific type of architecture. You brought it up a little bit earlier, but can you describe what type of buildings or homes you're building, and just give us a little more, like for dummies, like the breakdown of what it is exactly?
Well, I build structures that essentially are flow forms.
Mhm.
So the majority of people live in boxes.
Yeah, yeah.
And so a box, if you think about it, has 8 corners. Like each room that you have has 8 corners.
Hmm.
And it was kind of cool. Like when I moved to Costa Rica, I was staying on a farm with a very, very practical woman, and her husband was a contractor. And whenever she would walk into a building, she would think about how hard it would be to clean.
Interesting.
And that really stuck in my craw because I was like, huh. So I started to observe, where do bugs go? And bugs go into crevices, and bugs go into vertexes, and they go into the corners of things. I'd always noticed where all the spiders would go. And Costa Rica has the most bugs ever, so it's very easy to witness what's happening. And so I started to look. I had already been looking into domes, but then I had started to actually visit domes, and I was like, wow, these structures have like no vertices, and I don't notice any bugs.
Hmm.
And so when I got into the work of Victor Schauberger,
Oh yeah.
he talked about building egg water tanks because of the flow form of an egg and how the water will move and how it'll never find a dead spot. And so I started to equate water tanks and living spaces as sort of the same dynamic because they're both, whether it's air or water, it's a fluid.
Right.
And so I was like, I already like domes. I like the way domes feel, and I like the way they feel because there's an actual energetic movement in it, and so it's alive, or I should say, it gives the capacity for more life,
Yeah.
and so that really turned me on. Um, so my company now, we'll build whatever the client wants, but my preference is always to build something that has a lot of curves in it,
Right.
especially like the great rooms of spaces, anything where there's a vault. I like to have curves in it. And then we orient the land, we orient the buildings. I'm very specific on how we orient the entrances, the exits, where the gray and black water goes. Like all of that's very site specific.
Yeah.
And depending on the client, sometimes we'll even tailor it to the person's astrology.
Interesting.
Yeah,
You,
because
you, yeah.
the way you can think of astrology is sort of like I guess you would call it the heavenly fingerprint for the way your body transduces energy.
Hmm.
And so, not that you're beholden to that, not like you're locked into that, but it's sort of the way your body will naturally want to move energy. And so, when I was studying Ayurvedic massage, um, I learned about all the different phases in the body and what sign they're under. So, for example, like let's say I have a client that's a Capricorn.
Right.
Capricorn, they usually have some sort of lock in their knees.
Hmm.
Knees represent home, actually represent what the actual house that somebody lives in, right? So if I'm ever building for a Capricorn, I would inform them of that, and I would look at their celestics chart, which is a little bit different than like a natal tropical astrology chart. And we go through the fine print of it, and then we would design the house where there was probably a little bit better flow, where the building was grounded more and say it's stilted. Like we would just attune it so that the energy never stagnates for that person,
Mm,
because in that person's auric field, there's already a stagnation around the notion of home.
interesting.
And then you can go through that with every single person.
I'm a Taurus. What would that be? My
Taurus
birth.
is net.
Okay, yeah, I just had my birthday the other day. So where in the where in
You
the
might not be a true Taurus.
okay,
So
well,
this is where I get in trouble, because I studied celestics, which is real sky astrology.
so what would it be, you think?
Well, send me your birth date and all your data, and I'll actually look at it. But you're
Okay.
probably at the end of Aries.
Oh, yeah, I'm April 29th.
You're definitely Aries.
Aries. Oh man. So what is Aries?
Aries is the ram.
Yeah. So
Aries archetype is the being that the best phrase you could say about Aries is that it's much better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
yeah, that sounds about right. I'm just gonna go
Yeah,
through it. Wow.
that's the phrase that defines Aries.
So
And
what would
so
the structure be like? How would you approach a client that's in Aries?
you
And
would definitely have a room that was dedicated to books,
dude,
or information.
that
Like
sounds
Aries are voracious consumers of information,
sounds about
and
right.
they're ruled by the head, right? It's the head. So you would need a space in your home that was just dedicated to that,
Wow. That
and
sounds
that would make you feel so good. Like that would make home feel like home for you.
dude, you're nailing it. I mean, I have books here, and we're my family now. We're moving here very shortly, and I'm like, I'm bringing on my books. My fiance is like, can you just like buy them new? I'm like, I will move them. You don't have to worry about them. I will take care. Like, because it's just how it is. It's like what is out there? What do I want to know? And this is what we'll go in today for sure in regards to architecture. But see, what to kind of to step back, if you don't mind, is isn't it it's I find it fascinating how you've taken your world of like massage therapy and been able to take that creativity and mend it so well with architecture, because as you start to realize they are really kind of one and the same when you get to like the core essence of what you're doing, right?
Yeah, because your house massages you.
Yeah.
So your house is you could think of your house as like a capsule,
Hmm.
right? And every time you enter it, you want nourishment. Like your home nourishes you. And so very early on, like I got massage from my family too, because when I was growing up, my father would always massage my mother. So I always associated loving touch as like a nourishing thing, because
Hmm.
I could see and feel my parents' appreciation for it. And so going into massage for me wasn't a clinical thing, it was a caring thing.
Right.
And your home is where you're cared for. So for me, it's all like one and the same. It's all like this
Right.
similar line.
Interesting. And so with that, I mean, when you're getting clients who are wanting you to build their homes, are they usually really receptive to this approach that you take? Because it doesn't, I don't know if this is a similar or a common thing in architecture, in building homes. Is it, or is this kind of something
No,
you, so are
no,
they,
it's not. It's not common, and clients want what they want.
right, right, right. Well,
I
and
uh,
yeah,
I make suggestions, and I'll often say if this then that.
yeah,
And I've had really great clients, and I've had not such great clients.
yeah,
Um, Everybody, what's the saying? They want a Rolls Royce, but they're on a Chevrolet budget.
yeah,
That
yeah,
type of thing.
right, right,
So, if I was to be fair to my clients, if we were to implement everything that I know should go into a structure, it would be out of everyone's budget.
right. Yeah,
It really, it really would. So a lot of times I have to temper my enthusiasm because I can kind of overwhelm people with too much information.
Yeah.
And most people can only handle one or two variables at a time.
Right.
And so in my advanced age here, I've kind of learned to like, pump the brakes and like, ease off the gas and be like, well, you might want to consider that, that's in full sunlight on that side. So it's be really, like I have to like
Right.
really pull back and make it as simple as possible.
Hmm.
But the majority of the time, I'm hired because I do funky things. But everybody that's paying for a custom home, they want their fingerprint on it. They want what they want.
Right. But what's interesting, and you maybe can elaborate on this, is how knowing very well that a lot of us in today's society aren't as far along intellectually, spiritually, obviously, emotionally, and just overall knowledge base. Um, how what you're bringing to the table is kind of a culmination of what makes us who we are in regards to the spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and learning how to make it specific to that individual. And a lot of people aren't in tune or connected to that. I would just say God, higher power, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it. And you see that disconnect, right? Is like you can sit there and of course, yes, maybe it's out of their budget, but you're like, no, I want to make this as much of you as possible to give you the best. And then people are like, well, I really want this look because this just suits me. And just obviously that no one does this in your field. It's like listening, just taking a moment for someone to just listen to what this guy is saying, or just being open minded to be like, maybe he's meaning something here. Because as you're talking about books, even though I'm in tune with what you're saying, I'm like, yeah, that really is something that I truly enjoy. Where most people be like, dude, just please build this. You know what I mean? And I just think that's something we're seeing all too often these days. And I can imagine with your job, you're getting quite the spectrum of responses to the way you approach it.
Yeah, and also I'm an artist at heart, so I
Right.
wouldn't ever say. A lot of times, any artist will tell you once they start a project, the project kind of has its own life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And like I try and tell that to my clients too, is like, and I've been lucky, my last three commissions, my clients have been very amenable to like where I see we should go.
Right.
Like I was like, at first I was thinking this, but now that we're in this space and now that I'm getting to know you a little bit better, you should do this.
Right.
And because each thing, I hate to sound like an animist, but like each thing has a consciousness, and as you're creating it, it's kind of growing in front of you. And sometimes you got to zig when you thought you were going to zag.
Yep.
And so, and that's the way I approach my like inventions too. Like
Mhm.
it's just like I thought this was going to be this, but it actually works much better as that.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's funny that you said that. I just not 2 days ago I had an episode with Tom Barnett. I work a lot with him. We're actually working on some creative film scripts ideas right now with another friend as well. And we had a whole conversation about how in hard times bring such great creativity, and why is that? And it's also one of the big components is people who are in tune with that, or following intuition, connecting to source, God, whatever. You would allow yourself to be open to the changes that come with creativity and hard times, like you said just now, of like, hey, I thought it was going to be this, but I gave myself the freedom, the permission to follow where it was going to go. Because when you get so single-minded or closed-minded, narrow path in regards to your creativity, you can lose sight of that. You're getting lessons, you're getting information all around you, but you're just completely ignoring it, right? And I think that's one of the big hindering, I guess, yeah, just it's a hindrance to a lot of people in regards to everything you're saying. It's like, I'm going to allow my creativity to flow through me. I'm going to listen. I'm going to make adjustments when necessary. knowing ultimately at the end of the day, I'm going to let that creativity come to life, however that may be. And that's a hard thing for people to understand today, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
Programming, you know.
I think that's why I can be extremely frustrating to people, is because just when they think they have me pinned down,
Mhm.
I've already like modified like my poor foreman. I'm always changing how we're doing things, like because I can't ever leave well enough alone.
Mhm.
And it's not that I'm a perfectionist at all. It's just much more like during the process of doing something, you learn how to do it better or different.
Totally.
And a lot of times different is better. And so it can be extremely frustrating to people that just want to punch a clock and just want to do the same thing over and over and over again. And I find that that's sort of my role in life, is to not really allow those people in my sphere of influence to ever have a steady state.
Totally. But but it's so true though, and it's funny because when you're so in tune with that, and because really what's happening, and you can agree with me or not, but it's like you're so present with what you're doing, and when you're present, obviously you're literally centered. You're allowing all that energy to flow through you. So when you're like all over the place, people who don't want to be there or aren't allowing themselves that freedom, they're like, this guy's, it's like, what is he doing? But in reality, you're just like, I'm so in what I'm doing, as you said, and new information's coming as we're speaking, and or new ideas are just showing up, and you're like, light bulb, and that's the thing.
I actually think it's something much less profound.
What do
At
you
least
think
for
it is?
me, I'm really lazy.
Oh.
So I'm always doing a cost benefit analysis in my mind.
Hmm.
Like it's how I got into biochar.
Yeah,
For
let's go down.
3 years, for like 3 years, I was flipping compost piles in the tropics,
Yeah,
and I was getting terrible yields, and it was terrible work. And I
yeah.
was just like, this sucks. Like, I'd rather eat GMO food. Like, this is the worst. And I hated it. And then I got a job to build this structure where the guy who hired me, he was a permaculture expert. And so
Hmm.
we would drive, 6 hours together, and we would just talk the entire time. And I was telling him my disdain about composting, and he goes, "Huh? Have you ever heard of terra preta?" I'm like, "No, what's terra preta?" And then he explained what terra preta was and how the Spanish conquistadors, found all this great soil in the Amazon basin. And there wasn't like an Amazon rainforest as we know it now. It was like all agriculture. And I was blown away. So I just started studying it. And it was like, oh my God, I can get instant compost?
Yeah,
Yes. All I need is a little fire. I'm already building ovens. Like,
yeah.
let me just modify one of my own ovens. And it, like, a lot of the things that I think of are just like, how can this make my life easier?
Right. But that was part of our conversation the other day, and that's really funny because like, dude, I just don't want to have to do extra work. But as you said, it's like it shouldn't be this difficult, and everything does come back to, okay, what is it in its simplest form? What are we doing here? But part of that is the creativity. Hey, I don't want to work as much. How can I be creative? Even though your friend told you, but it was being open to that information.
Yeah.
So let's go down that path. What is biochar for someone who has never heard of it?
Biochar is pyrolyzed carbon. So everything that's ever like has a birth and grows and dies is primarily carbon.
Hmm.
And you can go a little bit more esoteric that pretty much everything is just hydrogen, but for simplicity's sake, we can say all living things are composed of carbon.
Right.
And when it's alive, it has fluids and gases and all this other stuff in there, but it's primarily carbon.
Hmm.
So what you can do in the plant kingdom, anybody that has plants, you're always having to trim them. They're always having leaves fall off. Like plants are always giving, and it's not just their fruit or their leaves for food, but they're just always shedding.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say the word shedding now. That could be like but yeah, the things are shedding, and you can take all that mass
Mhm.
and cook it. And so pyrolyzation is when you heat biomass without oxygen. So you can take like a very simple vessel, any type of canister, fill it with whatever biomass you have, put
Right.
that in another heated space, heat it sufficiently, and everything in that canister will start to release all its gases and fluids,
Mhm.
and it's an exponential increase in the release rate to a certain temperature. And then once all that releases and is out, that that is gone from the system, and then all you're left with is the carbon.
Mhm.
And that's much different than charcoal, where charcoal is like if you just had a fire pit or a fireplace, that's exposed to a ton of nitrogen and oxygen while it's burning. So it has oxidative stress in it.
Got you.
The cool thing with biochar, as I understand it, is even though it's under heat stress, because the oxygen is immediately pushed out in my retorts at least, once all that is out, then the only thing that's actually left to burn is the volatiles that were endemic to the actual biomass.
Mhm.
And so you end up with this perfectly black carbon, and that carbon is apparently the best home for all the good microbes that transport nutrients. So like today I put a video, just like a little short video
Yep.
on Instagram of like what my current soil mix is.
Yep.
And what I do is I make the biochar, and then I mix it with something called effective microorganisms, and that populates the biochar. And then after a month of that curing, then I mix that with other soil in a bono and like some sort of fiber. Like I like to use like little coconut fiber,
Mhm.
and um, and then rock powder, because rock powder is full of minerals.
Right.
And
Right.
then that becomes the base for all my tree planting.
Wow. And then how's the yield been? I mean, it's kind of a softball question, but comparatively.
Well, the best thing I would say is in Costa Rica, you have wild growth pretty much with no matter what you do. I just want to be honest about that. But the way you can tell the health of your plants is what bugs are attacking.
Mm.
So before biochar, I had real bad problems with these type of ants. They're like these big National Geographic ants with big pinchers. They're called leafcutter ants.
Yeah.
Here we call them sampopos.
Mm.
They were eating all my fruit trees. Like I lost a whole cacao plantation to it. Like it was pretty upsetting. Like they just denuded my side of the mountain for years. Ever since the biochar, I've had none of them.
Wow. Why is that? Is it something just that's being like in
It's
this?
exactly the way our body works. You know how they say our immune system starts in our gut?
Yeah.
So our immune system is the interface, as much as I can tell, between all the like probiotics that are in our gut relative to all the different carriers of information through
Mm.
to our cellular system. That's what soil is. Like so if you were to like flip us inside out, we would be a plant. so so if our gut was outside of our body, that would be like analogous to the soil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you make this soil super healthy, you've made the immune system to the plant like so
Right.
healthy. And because it's using all the in this area of the tropics, The soil is known as bauxite, which is aluminum silicate.
Hmm.
Aluminum is a terrible transporter of bacteria.
Yeah.
Beneficial and non-beneficial. So like you could have like a toxic dump next to your house and the bacteria, there wouldn't be any bacteria because it's bauxite clay. Like it would seal it over there.
Right. Keeps it.
But in the same vein, there's terrible communication
Right.
between the root bases in the plant and the root bases to other root bases, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And also now everything's been electrified. You know, the whole world has like all these EMF signals, and with all the power lines and stuff like that, the
Yeah.
power companies use the ground as the return now.
Yeah.
So you have all those frequencies that are running through the ground, and that affects the plants too. So what the biochar helps with is the biochar is a wonderful EMF remediator. Like we've done a lot of experiments with putting it in walls to stop, you know, Wi-Fi signals and all this other stuff.
Wow.
And it works great. Like there's a biochar paint that you can buy. But I think for the plants, it gives the plants like a break from the ground frequencies.
Right.
And then also it houses all the good bacteria. Also, it houses beneficial fungus also.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing for me. I'm working with Barnett on this documentary where we're talking about threads of like where your money is really being purchased, like what you're purchasing, where is it really going to, and I'm doing a specific piece on the what's it, basically the food industry, and you know everything's organic and all this, but I'm talking to farmers and like what this truly means and part of the deception that comes with this. And one of the things that we've talked about, I've spoken with a lot of farmers, is when you're looking at something like these big corporations where they're looking at like you know 1,000 acres of spinach, right? You have to understand like that isn't healthy. Like the soil is not that healthy. So what you're really getting isn't necessarily what you think you're getting. And you know it's understanding, going as always to the soil, looking at what is the soil life like. You know, is there soil that can actually sustain that much the way they're doing it, with the amount of, you know, production, not doing successions, you know, not turning, not doing, you know, moving things, you know, as they should. And what is that doing then to the soil? Ultimately, then what is it that we're consuming? So I think there's so much with what you're talking about with biochar and understanding how you can ultimately just give back to the soil or give back to your gut. Like these are things that we should be, you know, I think doing all the time, or at least trying to at least understand. If you're not changing your whole life that day, it's like, okay, well, what can I start to learn? And
Right.
you know, biochar, as you said, there's so many things now. There's a paint for it. You can even use it for paint.
Yeah. There's a EMF remediating paint that my friends in Ontario, Canada used
Wow.
to block, because when the 5G went up, like they could really feel it. Like
Yeah.
they felt the effects of it.
Hmm.
So there's this company that sells, you know, this, they make the biochar into a powder and they mix it into their paint, and you paint it on and it apparently blocks the frequency, or
Interesting.
at least it at least tones it down.
Now, when you're in the houses that you build, do you put it? You said you put it in the walls, or you've tested it in the walls?
Yeah, so I also like I got my chops with building and with natural building, and so some of my first structures were cob, and my house has a lot of cob
Mhm.
construction in it. And cob is like a very old way of building with mud, and you mix mud with some sort of fiber and some sort of aggregate, and um, and then you apply that in a certain way depending where you are in the world. And here, because we have lots of big fibers, we have lots of bamboo, we do something called bareke. So we'll make a lattice structure out of split bamboo, and then we'll just glom on the cob on either side, and it'll give you a solid wall.
Hmm.
So what I've done with some of these structures is I've just mixed the biochar into the cob.
Oh.
So that gives me, because you would never know, you would never know it's there.
Hmm.
And I think it's a wonderful way of building. I was telling Owen, I was like, when I really started to gain real confidence, because you have confidence like when you're being like stoked by the machine, but at least I could always feel like the world wasn't going the way I wanted it to.
Right.
When I really started to truly feel like a man and feel confident was when I knew I could look at any piece of land and I could take the earth that was under my feet and I could build with it and I could grow with it.
Right.
And the second I knew that, like I know that in my body, like there's no, that can't be taken away. That's when my real confidence started to flourish.
Yeah.
And biochar is just like it's just one of these things. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Like I make toothpaste out of it. Um, I think I think its potential hasn't even been tapped yet.
I was gonna say, you said that they found remnants of it way back when.
Well, yeah, well they so with all the pillaging of the rainforest,
Mm.
there's all these logging companies that go in there and do slash and burn. Well, there was a expose like in like 2007 or 2008 because this one company came through there and they hit these massive pots
Yeah.
and they were like, whoa, 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 we can't destroy the rainforest anymore. We got the archaeological,
Yeah. Yeah.
find here. And what they kept finding were these massive pots that made no sense because they were huge. Like, what are these pots for giants?
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But what they found out was that these pots were actually these little kilns where they would put all this firewood in. And then what the Brazilians were doing at the time was they do a chop and drop where they would drop all their biomass on top. Like, so say my hand is like the little kiln,
Hmm.
and then they would have a succession of these pots, running in a line up to a couple miles. They would chop and drop all the biomass on top of that. And then they would come and throw earth over the biomass. So they were doing like a hugelkultur biochar. And then they would light the fires and that would cook down all the biomass. So they would have these massive lines of biochar already in place on the ground, and then they would just plant it.
Wow. And you said this
So
would be miles.
what's that?
You said this would be miles long. Is that
Yeah, they found lines up to 3 miles long.
wow?
Yeah. No, like the Spanish conquistadors, they said it was the most heavily agriculturally intensive area that they had ever seen, and some of them had been to Asia.
Wow.
So like Asia had the whole thing on lock for a very long time, and they go to there and they're like, man. And so for whatever reason, all the indigenous died off. Like 95% of the indigenous died off within 100 years, and then the rainforest was like, good soil, yes, and that changed the entire climate of the entire world. Because
Wow.
within 100 years, like there was like 4 times the amount of oxygen production. I mean, this is all like you have to take it with a grain of salt because I don't really believe the historical timeline. But at least in mainstream science, that's the narrative that they're getting. But there is fact that the indigenous Brazilians were cooking their biomass down and planting it intensively.
Wow. Well, this is part of what I wanted to bring up too in regards to architecture and what you just said now is these, with these narratives is how just like that it's they're finding these things so we know people are in now in modern day are like, look, this is happening, this is what we just came across, what does it mean? And so you're realizing it's like, oh, these people, a lot of times you think, oh, they were so far behind us, we're so far behind, but then you look and you go, and the one thing going to architecture, this has been always my thing ever for the longest time is, well, look what has been built and why aren't we doing that? Why can't we do that? And this is one of the big things is people say time and money, but as someone who is an architect and has gone through this, like, what is your viewpoints? Where do you see it? Because I don't know, but it just makes my mind spin when especially when I was at the pyramids years ago, and I was like, we're saying that we're so far advanced and this is built. I'm like, am I missing something here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're missing the truth.
Yeah. So what's your point of view on that then?
Every physical system degrades over time. And
Right.
so the physical system that we know of as this plane of existence is in a degradation phase.
Right.
We come from much more advanced people.
Yeah.
Even people were bigger, they were stronger,
Yeah.
they were smarter. You
Yeah.
know, right now everything's just about stroking the narcissist. You know, the narcissist wants to hear how good they are and how smart they are. And I'm sorry, people are dumber now. Like at my advanced age of 45, people are noticeably more dumb now than they were just 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like without a doubt, on average, what I'm witnessing, and it's because in a physical system you have entropy, you have the breakdown of the system. There's an energy dissipation. We can just look at our own bodies and just be honest about it. We'll look at the larger body that we're in. So we're fed the narrative that we're the highest, and because we have electromagnetic, really destructive technology at our fingertips, that we're so advanced. But all that's just a narrative. That's not true.
Yeah.
So part of my entree into building was building ovens and fireplaces and getting really big into duct work and how to create convection currents and fluid dynamics. Because once again, just like a water tank needs to have a certain amount of turbidity where things are moving, all heating systems, especially when you're doing wood-fired systems, they have to have a certain level of convection where things are moving, right? And so I came across a bunch of different people that were professional builders of fireplaces. And so I remember that, like, we would be talking about these fireplaces and the different names and what time period they're from. And we all were like, and I, just being a newbie to it, I'm like, these suck.
Right.
These are terrible distributors of heat. Like, this doesn't, like, you talk about the amount of energy that you had to feed this thing, and with the absolute bullshit return on investment.
Right.
And so this one guy was explaining to me, oh, well, this was in this time period and it has a really shallow wall, so it kicks the heat out. And I'm like, but it's smoking everything out in the room, because I'd already been building like rocket stoves and rocket mass heaters, and they're like so far superior.
Right.
And I was like, this is terrible. You're telling me this was the state of the art, the a priori? Like, I'm like, no way. Right. And then the whole thing with the mud flood and the ancient architecture stuff started to come through, and I'd already been studying about structures because I built a couple earth batteries. So because I was building earthen homes, I was like, wow, we can make a whole home a battery. Yeah. Because the top of the house is, if the house is, say, 7 meters tall, it has, 700 volts difference between the top of the house and the bottom of the house. If the whole house is an insulator, if I run some conductors in it, I should be able to have electricity. Like, that just makes sense. That's the way batteries work. Right. And it's just like, this will be fun to experiment with. And then all these people started coming out with, like, the ironwork on the tops of these houses. And then what got me the most was when they started showing the way all these quote unquote fireplaces work. They all had these like two posts in the front, an anode and a cathode.
Yep.
and they had this really narrow box of metal where it looked like a box, but there was actually a positive and then a negative, and then those were always connected to some metal on the top. And
Right.
I'm like, these places were heated by resistive heating.
Yep.
This is exactly the way a resistor works.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why there's no smoke points, no char points.
No.
And one of my neighbors here, he was a retired chimney sweep, and he was telling me about all the different bullshit that was through the northeast of the United States. So I just kind of pieced it all together, and I was like, when the mud flood stuff hit, I was like, damn
Yep.
it, I know it.
Yeah.
I've been feeling this forever and all these different things. And then my mentor, Joseph Davidovitz, the Geopolymer Institute gentleman, the way he explained how geopolymers worked and how a geopolymer could actually be like a battery, and then that kind of explains the whole, Giza plateau and all the pyramids there. It all just kind of makes sense that we come from a much, much more advanced, non-wasteful civilization that we don't know what happened to them, but we're the remnants of them, and we've just been fed a false narrative.
Yeah.
And also another thing too, now that I really think about it, growing up in the United States, I was always fed the narrative that we were always warring and killing each other. I think the majority of that's bullshit.
Yeah.
I actually don't think that at all. The amount of carnage in movies,
Yeah.
like I just look like at the amount of carnage that they put in movies, that they want to show like every brother and every father was killing everyone else. People have no idea what type of trauma that would create, in a sense where we wouldn't have population growth at all.
No.
I think almost all of that's a lie.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something there because in regards to understanding, talking about even just let's talk Cold War. Yeah, there's things that happen obviously as people are getting, but a lot of people will talk that nothing really came of it, right? Like, and that's just one example. But we get fed like constantly, like it's the worst thing ever all the time. And if that is the case, it's the same thing I always remember. Even in high school in my class for history, it was like, well, if all these wars are happening and there's like this continuation of like, a grace period and then war and then this, I'm like, why would anyone even want to grow? Like, why would it, you know what I mean? Because you're just in the mindset of like, this is just going to come back full circle, right? So there's definitely questions. I admit, I never went to the full extent that you're saying here, but it made me really think. I'm like, why it really doesn't feel right here. Like this doesn't make sense to me. But one of the big things to kind of piggyback earlier, we were talking about the fireplaces. I remember we went to Versailles, the building, and I remember being in there and I see these fireplaces. I'm like how did this work? And then I later found out that the chimneys got put on much later. I'm like, well, then was this like, I remember thinking, I'm like, is this just for show? I'm like, is this truly what the place was? Like, or is this a new thing? Did they just add this? And I was like, oh no, they added the chimneys. I'm like, why would they add and this is before I had any real understanding of what we're talking about here. So would you know what I mean? Would you want to, is that what you were talking about in regards to like the battery type?
Yeah, and that's why they use such precious metals on their structures, because the precious metals are better conductors.
Right.
So we're fed this whole thing like, oh, they were so ornate and so rich and blah blah. No, it's much more mechanical and simple.
Right.
They use the people that had the means used better conductors. Like Paris was called the City of Lights in the early 1800s.
Yeah.
They weren't lighting candles, people.
Yeah. I grew up in Chicago, and they had the great, the Chicago Fair.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we grew up learning like, oh, the whole city like went down because like a cow knocked over a lamp in a barn. Like, and yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, but this is what you're being taught in, or the Chicago, the World Fair, basically. went up in like 2 years. And when you see the structures, I'm like, and this is at even a young age. I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, that was 2 years. Like, I asked way too many questions as a kid and to today. But it's just like, it is interesting when now from an architecture standpoint, it's like, is that even physically possible?
No, it's not. It's not at all. Like, that's the thing, is like, just on the most practical level, whether my narrative is correct or not, the narrative that they're giving is absolutely wrong. It's
Interesting.
not true. And there's a difference between blueprints and then architectural elevations. So almost everything that you see that's pre 1850
Hmm.
doesn't have blueprints. It has architectural elevations.
Hmm.
I could go to Chicago right now and do an architectural elevation for the Sears Tower. That's not fucking elevations. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not a blueprint.
Right.
So you have all this manufactured architectural, oh, we designed this and we did. I tell this story all the time because it's still mind blowing to me. In World War II, there was this Italian cathedral that the entrance mezzanine had a bomb that went right through the dome. And it went through the dome, through the floor, and it went down into the basement to the catacombs that were underneath the cathedral. And
Hmm.
the bomb never exploded. Okay. And I think this happened in like the early 40s, like 41 or 42. So National Geographic went in there to talk about how to repair this particular cathedral. To this day, they have not figured it out.
Hmm.
They have laser levels, like architects with laser beams on their head. Like, they have everything doing levels and elevations and like, oh, and they still have not figured out 80 years after the fact how to fix this mezzanine level of the entrance of this
Really?
cathedral.
So why? Like, I guess the question is, what is so complex about it?
It's the
That it
consciousness.
right.
So when you start to get into cymatics, you'll understand that all these rose windows in these
Mm-hmm.
cathedrals, each one of them bears a cymatic signature of the consciousness of the people who created it. If you can't resonate at that level, you can't build that structure.
Makes that, yeah. Okay. I mean, you see those that, and for anyone, just look up cymatics and look it up in churches, cymatic, architecture, churches. They're everywhere in old
Yeah,
art, and it's the most fascinating thing. And when you go into these places, as you said, they carry resonance. If you can look under a microscope, or not a microscope, but like to see visually what the cymatic of a different frequency is, and you start to see how they resemble very much a lot of these in these churches and other places around the world.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's very obvious 1,000 years ago, there wasn't the huddled masses in the cathedrals praying. Like, no, they were there were no heating elements in any of these places. Any builder in the world will tell you the worst thing that you could do in cold places is build high ceilings.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
that makes, yeah, complete
like
sense.
if you have the average European is 5'6" tall, and you have these windows and these doors that are, meters and meters and meters high,
Right.
none of it fits,
Yeah.
none of it makes sense the way it's told.
Well,
I'm
I've heard,
sorry.
yeah.
And the consciousness that when you're in these places, like I've only been in 4 cathedrals, if you're sensitive, you're literally in a different dimension. Like,
Mhm.
it's a totally different thing.
Oh, yeah. When you feel that, even just when they're playing, also, I don't know all, I can't say this with certainty, but why have in these old cathedrals, like some that have the organs and things like that, where it's so many pipes that carry obviously not just the tone or the tune of what you're hearing, but as you said, they carry electricity, they carry charge. And when you're
Yeah.
in these places built with the structures and having the cymatics, having the curvatures, is and you've seen video, we've all seen videos where someone can go on one side of an old church, an old building, and it's they can hear it on the other side. Like, this isn't anything out there, right? But now you're carrying all that energy and frequency. And then from your point, as you said, having high ceilings in these places that weren't heated supposedly, like that makes no logical sense. Or the, other things I've heard you talk about, and these doors that were whatever, 8 meters, 7 meters, 10 meters high. And it's like, shh, do you want to describe that too? Why that makes no
So,
logical sense as an architect?
so as a builder, you'll know the hardest thing that you can do is actually hang a door correctly. Building structures, getting level, all that is like easy. But to do doorways properly and to hang doors is like, so imagine a normal door here is 2 meters, 2 meters 10. So it's a little bit right around 7 feet, let's say,
Yeah.
tall by 90 centimeters wide. That is like a fifth of the size and like 1/100th of the weight
Yeah.
of what some of these doors in these cathedrals are. What
Insane.
it takes for a professional carpenter to do that right, like just to have the hinges that can hold these little doors that we have, to have any life at all, let's say 10 years on the hinges, you have to do a lot of things correct. Let's say my crew members were the same size as the guys that were hanging the doors on the cathedrals.
Yeah.
It would be nearly impossible because you would have to have scaffolding up. So, how would you have your scaffolding up, pivot something, and put it on a hinge,
Right.
and then move your scaffolding out of the way at the same time you're getting plumb and level?
Yep.
It's not happening.
Right. And no one's doing that to this day, right?
No,
To make
no, I can't sell. I have these Balinese doors that are literally 1,000 pounds a piece, and they're like super expensive. I can't sell them because nobody can install them.
Interesting. And this is where it goes to show you, and this is why architecture, in just regards to even just going back to human potential, is like your potential is so much more than we realize. But then it's also looking back and knowing the potentials before that we could be learning from, you know for whatever, they're not being told to us, whatever the case may be, but it's all right in front of us, of just asking simple questions of like, how did this door get put up?
Mhm.
Or going to the pyramids again, like, how did they build this structure the way they said? And when if you're there and you can be there in person with these places, it's also very much helpful because you are getting resonance too. If you are
Mhm.
in touch with that, you're like, I'm feeling something in regards to this place, and it starts getting you pondering. I don't know how else to describe it, but for me specifically, when I went to Giza, and I'm sitting at this, the pyramids, I'm walking up to it, I'm like, these base block, like the base rock or whatever it is, the geopolymers or whatever they may be. I would love to hear what that means or what geopolymers are. But I'm like, there's immediately I was like, there's no way the story I'm being told. There's just no way. And I'm looking at the thieves door that they have everyone going through, and we go in there. You're climbing up really, like, I was like sitting there. I'm like, it just the whole time just going, this is so awesome, but there's no way. I didn't know the answers. I wasn't like I wasn't like, oh, it's this or that. I just was like, I don't know, but I'm like, whatever that tour guy just told me, and whatever I learned, in sixth grade, I'm like, there's no possible way, because I'm just basking in it, and I'm like, how could that happen? And I'm
Mhm.
like, I know we can't build this today, and so why is that? You know what I mean? If it's the way they said it was, I'm like, well, something's not right here. But you said something earlier, and I just brought it up now, that it's potentially something with geopolymers.
Yeah, a geopolymer is an alkaline, excuse me, it's an acidic concrete. So the way concrete works is you have a binder, and that's usually Portland cement. In today's world, we use Portland cement. That's alkaline because it's mainly calcium based. A geopolymer, as my teacher described it, is an acidic concrete. So as it cures, the environment is naturally acidic also.
Mm.
So it has a much longer duration. Like it will last much longer because it's not fighting its environment.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, alkaline things die in this environment. They might have 100-year life, but these older plasters and what was called Roman cement, all of that's the geopolymer.
So, in regards though to the size of them, is that have an effect on the weight itself, or is it just purely the how long it can last?
Well, the size is the mass. Like, so mass rules the day in this realm.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think the sarcophagi, like, this is just my opinion, because I have friends that are shamanic and psychic and have traveled in those realms and had some weird experiences. And I've been around mountains here in Costa Rica that we're pretty sure were once pyramids.
They were what?
They were once pyramids.
Interesting.
Yeah, like, you know, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Yep.
Like they thought that was just a hill
Oh,
forever.
yeah.
And then there was like, oh, there's the largest pyramid in the world under here.
Yeah.
there's that all over the world.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
there's pyramids everywhere. And a friend of mine who's I really trust, he had a dream vision journey. You could slash slash slash, where there was a worldwide system where you would walk into the pyramid and it would transport you to another pyramid. And what I think the pyramid does is they're all at the angle of repose, which is 52 degrees.
Yeah.
So I built orgone generators and all these things dealing with how to concentrate bioelectricity,
Right.
which bioelectricity isn't like a electromagnetic. There's no aspect to it that's detrimental to living organisms. Bioelectricity, when you concentrate it, can act as like a superconductor. Is the best way of saying it.
Wow.
And so the way he explained it was you'd walk into like this shallow dish at the bottom. There's this very shallow concave dish. You'd walk to the center of it, and right before you got to center, you were shot and transported to the
Wow.
next. And that's what one of the previous civilizations used for international travel.
Wow, man. Dude, I mean, if that is true, man, that's pretty crazy. But it really does make you think in regards to history of, you know, why were all these pyramids everywhere? If we were supposedly so um, disconnected from the rest of the world, not supposedly not knowing of other land masses within, this material realm that we know of today, or at least mainstreaming, you start to think, well, how does this make sense then that all these places understood these pyramids, similar structures, sizes, dimensions? Like, this is too many coincidences that are taking place purely based off of, as they say, that there wasn't this interaction. I'm with you. I don't think that's the case, but it just goes to show you, though, also the intelligence that was there. And just knowing too, and I always think of, like, you see and hear about, wars and natural disasters taking things down. But when you look at all these big monoliths and places all over the world, or even, I'm right outside New York City, seeing these cathedrals even there. And I'm like, these places that have seen so much catastrophe, these are still standing. I mean, they last so much longer. And it makes me then just go, why? Well, why?
They were built with a different consciousness.
Absolutely. And so with that,
it's just not technology.
right.
Like, technology is just an extension of your consciousness. So the technology that's pervasive to the minion class of people right now is commensurate with like first, second chakra.
Mm-hmm.
I really think what was built in the past, these things that have staying power, these things that have this timeless beauty, those are much higher on our axis mundi, like
Oh yeah,
much higher.
dude, I would agree with you there, man. And I don't want to keep you anymore. This has been awesome conversation. I would love to do this again another time. We can dive more into those things. But I guess my question to you, one last one, is in all your experiences through architecture, what has been, as you were saying earlier about keeping things simple, what has been one of the things that, other than the biochar, that's been kind of like an eye opening of like, wow, this is so simple to understand and so effective in
The
just regards.
biggest, the biggest thing that I learned that was like the biggest wow factor to me was learning that if you take a piece of paper, something that's plainer, and you put one curve on it, it's now 6 times stronger.
Really?
If you put a double curve on it, it's 13 times stronger.
Huh.
And so the whole biomimicry aspect of curves, and like the reason why our ancestors with their flying buttresses and use all these archways, is because you just put a little curve on something and it makes it tremendously stronger.
Interesting.
Yeah, tremendously strong. And it sound deadens. So one thing I have a problem with all these pre-made stuff that you buy from China, it's all planar. And when you install it, sound moves through the structure terribly. The second you start having undulations and curves and all this stuff, has wonderful sound deadening
Wow.
componentry to it. And it's just better. Like you can do a lot more with a lot less.
Hey, man, that's so fascinating. That's so fascinating. And it makes that much more sense of understanding these places that had the curves, man. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, man, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do appreciate all the time you've given, the knowledge, wisdom. But for kind of closing out, where can people find you? Where's people have questions like myself.
The only I guess you would call it social media thing that I'm using right now is what's it called? Instagram.
Oh,
So
okay.
I have Instagram as Biocharisma. I don't have my website anymore. I forgot to pay. I forgot to pay for the thing because I've never populated it. So I just populate in Instagram with
Awesome,
short videos, and
dude.
I'm at Biocharisma.
Awesome, man. Well, I can attest that it is awesome to see the things that he's doing. It is insightful, even if you're not someone trying to pursue that. Just starting to get simple understanding of, as you said, the tools around you, the soil beneath your feet, and knowing how to use it to your advantage. So yeah, man, I appreciate your time. Like I said, I'd love to do this again. I have so many questions, um,
Yeah,
but
anytime,
um, but awesome, man.
anytime.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And for those watching, go check them out at BioCharisma. And everyone else, have a wonderful night. And we'll see you till next time.